You don't get to speak in this room, Daniel Whitmore said, his voice cutting clean through the polished silence like it belonged there. Like everything did, the $30 million view behind him, the 12 executives seated in tailored suits, the long glass table reflecting ceiling lights so bright it almost erased the people at it, and Ava Brooks standing at the far end with a thin folder in her hands, her badge slightly tilted. Her presence already fading in their eyes before she even opened her mouth. But she didn't step back, not this time. Her fingers tightened around the paper, the edges slightly worn from where she had read it over and over again in the dim light of her cubicle, long after most of the floor had gone home. Because something about it didn't sit right, something quiet but dangerous, buried beneath layers of polished legal language. Sir, she said, steady, not loud, not shaking, just present. The liability clause on page 47, it doesn't protect us. A few heads turned, not in curiosity, but in annoyance. A man near the center leaned back with a faint smirk, another tapped his pen against the table like he was counting seconds until she disappeared. Daniel didn't even glance at the document. His eyes stayed fixed on the skyline beyond the glass wall, calm, controlled, distant. That's not your concern, he replied, flat, final, but Ava didn't move. The air shifted just slightly, like something unseen had entered the room. It transfers full risk to us, she continued, her voice still measured, still respectful. If this deal goes through as written, we could lose over $200 million within 90 days. This time, a pause, small, almost invisible, but it was there. One executive frowned, another reached for the document. But the moment didn't last. Daniel exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that ended conversations before they began. And when he turned, his expression didn't change, not even a flicker. Security, he said. Calm enough to sound routine. Remove her. A chair shifted, someone let out a quiet chuckle, the kind that didn't need permission. Ava felt the weight of it, the dismissal, the assumption, the quiet agreement that she did not belong in that space. But she didn't argue, didn't plead, she just held the folder a second longer before letting it rest against her side. Her eyes lifted once, not in defiance, not in anger, but in something else, something steady and certain. Like she had already seen what was coming and accepted that no one else had. The doors opened behind her with a soft mechanical sound, and as she stepped out into the hallway, the light changed, colder, harsher, reflecting off steel and glass. Her reflection followed her for a moment in the polished surface of the elevator doors, still quiet, unshaken, and upstairs, behind closed glass, the meeting continued like nothing had happened, like the warning had never been spoken. Like silence was safer than listening. The elevator doors closed with a soft metallic hush, sealing Ava Brooks inside a narrow box of reflected light and quiet judgment. Her shoulders still squared, her grip still steady on the folder now resting against her side. The hum of the building running through the floor beneath her shoes like a distant engine that never stopped, and for a moment she just stood there, breathing evenly, not rushing to press a button, not chasing after what had just happened. Because she already knew, she had seen it hours ago under the dim glow of her desk lamp, the numbers that did not align, the clause that did not belong, the subtle shift of responsibility disguised beneath polished language, and she had traced it line by line, checking it twice, then a third time, not because she doubted herself, but because she understood what it meant if she was right. $200 million was not just a number, it was jobs, reputations, futures, all balanced on a sentence no one else bothered to read closely. The elevator chimed softly as it began to descend, floor 29, 28, 27, each number lighting up above the door like a quiet countdown, and her reflection stared back at her in the brushed steel, calm, composed, almost detached. Like someone who had already accepted the outcome long before stepping into that room. Upstairs, the meeting resumed. Without hesitation, voices overlapping in controlled tones, the shuffle of paper, the low clink of a glass set gently on the table. Daniel Whitmore sat at the head, posture unchanged, pen in hand, the contract now open in front of him, but his attention was not on the details, it was on the momentum, the deal that had taken months to build. The pressure to close, the expectation that nothing and no one would interrupt the trajectory he had set. One of the senior partners leaned forward, pointing to a section near the end, suggesting a minor adjustment. Another nodded, agreeing without reading further. The room moved like a machine, efficient, confident, unquestioning, and for a second, just a fraction of a second, Daniel's pen hovered above the page. Not because of Ava, not because of what she said, but because something in the room had shifted, something small and almost invisible, like a note slightly out of tune. But it passed, just as quickly as it came, and the rhythm returned. Downstairs, the elevator opened into the lobby, wide, polished, indifferent. People moved in and out with purpose, heels clicking against marble, voices blending into a steady current of motion. Ava stepped out without hesitation, her pace measured, her eyes forward. She did not look back toward the upper floors, did not search for anyone to explain or to listen, because she had already spoken, and that was enough. Outside the glass doors, the afternoon light stretched across the street, bright but cold, reflecting off passing cars and tall buildings. She paused just for a second before stepping out, the city air meeting her with a quiet rush, and somewhere far above, behind layers of steel and glass, decisions were still being made, signatures still being prepared. And the line she had pointed to, the one buried deep in the contract, remained exactly where it was, waiting, silent, patient, and unchanged. The first alert came in quietly, just a flicker on a screen no one was watching closely, a red indicator buried beneath layers of dashboards and projections, easy to ignore if you were not looking for it, and no one in that room was, because the deal was already moving forward, signatures being prepared. Confidence filling the space like it always did when power believed it was in control, but 3 floors below. In a smaller office lined with monitors and half-finished coffee cups, a junior analyst frowned at his screen, his cursor hovering over a number that did not reconcile, a liability projection that spiked too sharply, too suddenly. He refreshed the page, thinking it was a glitch, but the number stayed, larger this time, heavier, like something waking up. That cannot be right, he murmured, leaning closer. Pulling up the contract, scrolling fast at first, then slower, more deliberate, until he reached the clause, line 47, the language dense, polished, almost elegant in how it concealed what it did, and when he read it twice, then a third time, the air around him seemed to thin. Upstairs, Daniel Whitmore signed the preliminary authorization with a smooth motion, his pen gliding across the page without hesitation. The room responding with quiet approval, a few nods, a brief exchange of satisfied glances. Momentum sealed, or so it seemed, until a phone vibrated against the table, once, then again, persistent, the kind of interruption that refused to be ignored. One of the executives glanced down, his expression tightening just slightly. "We may need a moment," he said, his voice careful, controlled, but not as steady as before. Daniel did not look up immediately, but the shift in tone registered, subtle, like a change in pressure before a storm. "What is it?" he asked, still calm, still certain. The executive hesitated, then turned the screen toward him, numbers scrolling, projections recalculating in real time, and there it was, not hidden anymore, not subtle, a cascade of exposure tied directly to the clause no one had questioned, losses stacking, not theoretical, not distant, but immediate, measurable, and accelerating. The room fell into a different kind of silence. Not the polished quiet of control, but the heavy stillness of realization. Daniel's eyes moved across the screen, then to the document in front of him, his fingers pausing just above the page, and for the first time since the meeting began, he read, not to confirm, not to approve, but to understand, line 47, exactly where she had pointed, the wording unchanged, the implication unmistakable, the risk entirely theirs. His jaw tightened, not visibly, not dramatically. Just enough to shift something in his posture. Around him, voices lowered, questions forming, no longer confident, no longer certain, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice echoed, calm, steady, not loud, but impossible to dismiss now. "It transfers full risk to us." The words settled into the room like weight, undeniable, irreversible, and suddenly, the absence of one person became louder than all the voices combined. "Stop the signing," Daniel Whitmore said, not loudly, not forcefully, but the room obeyed instantly, because something in his voice had changed. the certainty was still there, but now it carried weight, urgency, the kind that did not ask for permission. Pens froze mid-motion, pages half-turned, and every eye shifted back to him as he stood slowly from his chair, the contract still open in front of him, line 47 no longer hidden, no longer theoretical, but sitting there like a quiet detonation waiting for a signature to trigger it. "Walk me through this," he said, his tone measured, controlled, but no longer dismissive. One of the executives cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses, trying to recover the rhythm they had just lost. "It appears the liability structure is broader than initially modeled," he said carefully, choosing each word like it might break under pressure. Daniel did not respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the document, scanning now with a precision that had been absent before, every sentence weighed, every clause tested, and the deeper he read, the more the room seemed to narrow, conversations fading into background noise, until there was only the text and the realization unfolding line by line. This was not an oversight, not a minor adjustment, it was a complete transfer of exposure, a silent shift of risk that would not reveal itself until it was too late, until the losses were no longer projections but reality. "How did this pass review?" he asked finally, still calm, but the question did not float, it landed, heavy, undeniable. No one answered right away. A few exchanged glances, others looked down at their copies, flipping pages as if the answer might appear if they searched hard enough, but it did not, because none of them had seen it, none of them had looked closely enough, and in that silence, something else surfaced, not spoken, not acknowledged, but present, the memory of a voice that had tried to interrupt this exact moment before it happened. "She flagged this," one of the junior analysts said quietly from the far end of the table, his voice hesitant, but clear enough to reach across the room. Daniel's head lifted slightly, just enough to acknowledge the direction of the sound. "Who?" he asked, though the answer was already forming, already unavoidable. "Ava Brooks," the analyst replied, his fingers tightening around his tablet. "She mentioned the clause before she was removed." The word hung there, incomplete, but understood, and for a brief moment the room held its breath, not because of what was being said, but because of what it meant. Daniel's eyes returned to the document, but he was no longer reading it alone. Her voice layered over the text now, calm, precise, certain. "It transfers full risk to us." He closed the folder slowly, the sound soft but final, and when he looked up again, the room felt different, smaller, less certain. "Get me everything she reviewed," he said, his tone leaving no room for delay. And as the executives moved, not with confidence this time, but with urgency, the weight of a decision already made began to settle, not on the deal, not on the numbers, but on the moment that had been dismissed too quickly, the warning that had been heard but not listened to, and somewhere beyond the glass walls of that building, the person who had seen it first was already gone. The room no longer moved like a machine, it hesitated, stalled. Every motion now second-guessed, screens lighting up one after another as analysts pulled data, recalculated projections, verified what should have already been verified, and with each passing second the numbers did not improve, they sharpened, clarified, narrowed into something undeniable, exposure tied directly to the clause, cascading across departments, multiplying across timelines, not hypothetical anymore, not avoidable if executed. And Daniel Whitmore stood at the head of the table. Not speaking, not interrupting, just watching as the structure he had trusted began to reveal its cracks, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. "We need to pause all approvals," someone said, voice tight, controlled but strained. Another nodded quickly, already dialing legal, already shifting from confidence to containment, and through it all, one detail kept returning, not in words spoken aloud, but in the quiet space between them. She had seen it, before any of them, before the alerts, before the projections, before the moment it became real. She had stood in this exact room and said it clearly, without hesitation, and they had laughed, dismissed, removed her like she was the interruption, like she was the error. Daniel reached for the tablet handed to him, scrolling through the internal logs, timestamps lining up with uncomfortable precision, her access, her review, her flagged notes marked as low priority, overlooked, buried beneath higher-level approvals. his fingers paused on a single entry. A comment left in the margin of the document, brief, direct. Clause shifts full liability. Recommend review before execution. No emphasis, no dramatics, just clarity. And it had been ignored. He exhaled slowly, not out of frustration, not visibly, but enough to mark the shift, the realization settling deeper, not just about the deal, but about the moment he chose not to listen. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice steady but no longer distant. No one answered immediately, because no one had thought to track her. After she was escorted out, because in that moment she had not mattered, and now she was the only one who did. "Check HR," someone said quickly, already moving, already searching, names pulled up, access logs reviewed, the building system showing her badge exit time, 42 minutes ago, the timestamp precise, final, and suddenly the gap between when she spoke and now felt larger than it should have been, heavier than it needed to be. Daniel looked toward the glass wall, the city stretching out beyond it, bright, indifferent, unaware of what had just shifted inside, and for the first time since the meeting began, his focus moved beyond the deal, beyond the numbers, towards something else entirely, the absence of a voice that had tried to prevent all of this. "Find her," he said, not raised, not repeated, but carried with a weight that changed the room again, and this time, no one hesitated. The search moved faster than the deal ever had, quiet urgency replacing polished confidence. As systems were opened, logs pulled, security footage reviewed frame by frame, and Daniel Whitmore stepped out of the boardroom for the first time that day, the door closing behind him with a softer sound than before. But it carried more weight now. The hallway outside felt different, longer, colder, every step echoing just a little louder against the polished floor as he walked toward the elevators. His reflection following him in the glass walls, not distorted, not unclear, just unfamiliar. Like he was seeing himself from a distance for the first time, a voice came through his phone, low and efficient. "We found her exit record. She left the building 42 minutes ago. No forwarding address on file. Temporary contract." Daniel did not slow down, did not respond immediately. His thumb hovered over the screen before lowering it again, because there was nothing to say. That would change what had already happened. The elevator arrived with a soft chime, doors sliding open to reveal an empty space lined with brushed steel. He stepped inside, and for a moment, just a moment, he stood still, not pressing a floor, not moving, just listening to the quiet hum around him. The same sound she must have heard when those doors closed earlier, the same reflection she must have seen, calm, composed, unshaken. While everything behind her dismissed her as if she did not matter, the memory settled heavier than the numbers had, not sharp, not loud, just present, the kind that did not fade easily. He pressed the lobby button, and the elevator began its descent, numbers counting down in steady intervals, each one marking time he could not get back, each one widening the gap between action and consequence. Downstairs, the lobby remained unchanged, people moving through it with the same rhythm as before. Unaware of the shift happening above them, the doors opened, and he stepped out into the open space, his pace measured but direct, scanning the area not for confirmation, but for possibility. The security desk looked up as he approached, surprised, not by his presence, but by the urgency behind it. "Did you see where she went?" he asked, voice even, but carrying something new. The guard hesitated, thinking back, replaying the moment in his mind. "She walked out, sir, did not call a ride, just left." Daniel nodded once, a small motion, but enough to close that option. Outside, the city stretched wide and indifferent, traffic moving, signals changing, people passing by without pause, and for the first time, the scale of it registered, how easy it was to lose someone in it, how quickly a moment could disappear into everything else. He stepped toward the glass doors, the light shifting as they opened, the air outside cooler, sharper, carrying the distant sound of engines and footsteps and conversations blending together, and he paused just at the threshold, not because he did not know what to do, but because he understood what it meant, that finding her was no longer about fixing a deal, it was about facing a moment he had chosen to ignore, a voice he had chosen not to hear. And as he stepped out onto the sidewalk, the building behind him stood tall and unchanged, but something inside it, and inside him, had already begun to shift. The city did not slow down for him, it never did. Taxis moved in tight lines, horns echoed between glass towers, people crossed streets without looking twice, and Daniel Whitmore stood at the edge of it all, scanning faces that did not know him, did not care, each second stretching longer than it should have, because for the first time, control was not something he could reach for. Not something he could command, it had already slipped past him in the form of a quiet voice he chose to ignore. His phone vibrated again, sharp against his palm. "We traced her badge activity," the voice said quickly. "She accessed the contract at 11:32 last night, stayed until nearly 2 in the morning, cross-checked financial exposure models, she flagged it 3 times. Daniel's gaze shifted slightly, not outward now, but inward, reconstructing a moment he had dismissed too easily, the late hours, the quiet work no one saw, the decision to speak anyway, knowing the room would not welcome it. "Send me everything," he replied, his voice lower now, more focused, the kind that listened before it acted. A file came through seconds later, timestamps, annotations, small notes written without emphasis but with precision, each one pointing to the same conclusion, not dramatic, not exaggerated, just correct, and the more he read, the clearer it became. She had not guessed, she had not interrupted out of impulse, she had understood. Completely, before anyone else even thought to question it. Across the street, a bus pulled to a stop, doors opening with a hiss, people stepping off in quiet routine, and for a moment, he imagined her somewhere in that flow, not rushing, not looking back, just moving forward the same way she had walked out of that building, steady, certain, unchanged by the way she had been dismissed. Another call came in, this time from inside the building. "Legal confirmed it," the voice said, tight but controlled. "If we had executed the contract, we would have assumed full downstream liability, minimum exposure estimated at $200 million within the first quarter." The words settled into the air, heavier now, no longer theoretical, no longer avoidable, and Daniel closed his eyes for a brief second, not in frustration, not in anger, but in acknowledgement, because the truth had already been spoken before any of this happened, and he had chosen not to hear it. When he opened them again, the city looked the same, but it did not feel the same, the noise sharper, the distance wider, the absence clearer. "We need her analysis," the voice continued. "She is the only one who mapped the full risk pathway." Daniel nodded once, even though no one could see it, his hand tightening slightly around the phone, not out of panic, but out of resolve. "Then we find her," he said, and this time, the words did not belong to a position or a title, they belonged to a realization that had finally caught up with him, that the person he had dismissed as insignificant was the only one who had seen the truth clearly, and somewhere in the moving crowd ahead, the one voice that could still change everything was already walking the way. She did not stop right away, not when she reached the corner, not when the light changed. Not even when the noise of the street swallowed the last trace of the building behind her. Ava Brooks kept walking with the same steady pace she had carried through the hallway, through the elevator, through the doors that had closed behind her without hesitation, her steps measured, her posture unchanged, as if nothing had happened, as if being dismissed in a room full of power had not shifted anything inside her, because in a way, it had not. She had already done what she came to do. She had seen what others missed, and she had said it out loud. Whether they listened or not was never something she could control. A bus passed beside her, its brakes releasing a soft hiss, warm air brushing against her coat, and she paused only briefly at the edge of the crosswalk, waiting for the signal to change, her reflection faintly visible in the darkened window beside her, calm, composed, untouched by the noise around her. Behind her, footsteps approached, not rushed, not frantic, but deliberate. The kind that carried intention rather than urgency. "Ava!" Daniel Whitmore's voice reached her just before the light shifted, not loud, not commanding, but unmistakably directed at her. She did not turn immediately, not out of defiance, not out of hesitation, but because she did not need to. She had already heard that tone before. Earlier, sharper, colder, final. This one was different, and when she turned slowly, the city moved around them without pause, cars passing, people crossing, conversations continuing like nothing had changed, but between them, something had. Daniel stood a few feet away, his posture still controlled, but no longer distant, his gaze steady, not looking past her now, but at her, directly, as if for the first time. And for a moment neither of them spoke, the silence not empty, not uncomfortable, just full of everything that had not been said before. His hand tightened slightly around the phone at his side before he lowered it completely, choosing not to look at it again, choosing to stay in that moment instead. "You were right," he said finally, the words simple, unembellished, but carrying more weight than anything he had said in that boardroom. Ava's expression did not change, not because she did not hear him, but because she had already known, not in arrogance, not in pride, but in certainty. The kind that comes from understanding something deeply enough that it does not need validation. The traffic light shifted, the signal changing from red to green, and people began to move around them, brushing past, continuing forward, but neither of them stepped aside, either of them broke the moment. Daniel exhaled slowly, not out of pressure, but out of something closer to clarity. "We need your analysis," he continued, his voice steady, but now carrying something it had not before. Respect, not given lightly, not offered easily, but present, unmistakable. Ava looked at him for a second longer, not searching his face for approval, not measuring his words, just listening, the same way she had in that room, the same way she had read that contract, carefully, precisely. And when she finally spoke, her voice was the same as before, calm, grounded, unchanged. "I already gave it to you," she said, not harsh, not defensive, just true, and in that moment, the weight of everything settled fully between them, not in the numbers, not in the deal, but in the realization that the truth had been there all along, spoken clearly, simply, and only now, finally, heard. The city noise continued around them, steady and indifferent, but something between them had shifted into a quieter space, one that did not depend on traffic lights or passing footsteps. Daniel Whitmore stood there for a moment longer than he normally would have allowed himself, his posture still composed, but no longer guarded, as if the distance he had carried for years had been set down without ceremony. Ava Brooks did not move, did not step closer, did not step away. She simply stood where she was, grounded, present, her eyes steady, not searching for anything more than what was already clear. The truth had never needed volume. It had only needed to be heard. A breeze moved through the street, light but noticeable, catching the edge of her sleeve, lifting it slightly before letting it fall back into place. And Daniel finally spoke again, slower this time, not because he lacked words, but because he was choosing them carefully. "The deal is on hold," he said, not as a declaration of power, but as a statement of consequence. Ava gave a small nod, not surprised, not impressed, just acknowledging what should have happened from the beginning. He continued, "Legal is rebuilding the structure. From your notes." And for the first time, there was no distance in the way he said it, no separation between her work and the company's outcome, just a direct line of recognition. Ava glanced briefly toward the street, watching a line of cars pass, headlights reflecting off glass and steel, then back to him, her expression unchanged, not cold, not warm, simply honest. "It will still need a full audit," she said, her voice calm, the same tone she had used in the boardroom, the same tone that had been dismissed, now carrying a weight that could not be ignored. Daniel nodded once, not as agreement, but as acceptance, because he understood now that this was not about offering her a place, it was about acknowledging that she already had one, whether he had seen it or not. A pause settled between them again, not empty, but complete, and in that stillness, something unspoken passed, not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. The kind that did not erase what had happened, but refused to ignore it. Daniel looked back toward the building behind him, tall, unchanged, its glass reflecting the sky as if nothing inside it had shifted, but he knew better now, and when he turned back to her, there was no hesitation left, no distance to hide behind. "If you are willing," he said, his voice steady, grounded in something real for the first time that day, "we would like you to lead the review." Ava did not answer immediately, not because she needed time to decide, but because she understood what the question really meant, not just a role, not just a correction, but a shift in how she would be seen, and more importantly, how she would be heard. The light changed again, casting a softer glow across the street, and she took a small breath, not visible, not dramatic, just enough to mark the moment. "I will finish what I started," she said, her voice even, not as acceptance of him, but as commitment to the truths she had already spoken. Daniel gave a slight nod, not in authority, but in respect, and as people continued to pass around them, unaware of the shift that had taken place, Ava turned and stepped forward into the flow of the city once more, not looking back, not needing to, her pace the same as before, steady, certain, while behind her, Daniel remained for just a second longer, watching, not with control, not with judgment, but with something quieter, something earned, before he turned as well, the space between them no longer defined by power, but by a moment that had finally been understood.